Okay, so I'm going to show you how to change your brake pads. Now, this is really important that if you do not feel comfortable with being able to do this, do not attempt it and go to a garage and get it done professionally. The set of brake pads to be put onto a car when it comes to the front pads will normally cost you around sort of £40, whereas the rear pads tend to be more expensive because you have to use what's called a caliper wind back tool. Now the first thing is obviously take the wheel off, which is the stage that we're at now. And what I've done is just slightly unscrewed or completely unscrewed the brake fluid cap, but then just left it on top so dirt doesn't get in. And the reason for that is because I don't want the vacuum. Now the next thing we need to do is bring the caliper out. Now this is the caliper, this is the disc. Okay, so you have a sandwich, like in this picture here, between the pads and the disc. Now what happens is as you use your brake, the brake pads get closer and closer because they get worn until the point where they're at this point where I want to change them, and I need to now bring them back out again. So all I do is I use a straight head screwdriver to prise the caliper back out like this. You see, I'm just putting a bit of pressure on so it keeps the caliper out. Now this will be nice and loose. Sometimes you might still need to put a little bit more pressure on just to make sure there is absolutely no vacuum left in this. So the next thing you need to do is take the caliper carrier bolts off, which are the bolts that are at the back. Depends on the car and the size of the socket. So this car's 12mm. You then put them on. I've already loosened them up because they are normally very, very tight first of all. So again, if you use a long bar, it makes your life a little bit easier. Then, once you've taken these off, that then allows you to get to the caliper itself, or the pads. So now the caliper's been released, you can see that I can now take the caliper off. Now, for those of you that want to know how the brakes actually work, this is a piston, and when you put your foot on the brake, that pushes this piston out and then squeezes the pads onto the disc itself. The next thing you then want to do is take the old pads out, which is fairly easy. They just pull. Sometimes they do put up a little bit of a fight, but they do just come out like so. You can see there is still some friction material left on there, but while I've got the wheel off, I thought I might as well change them. And then the next thing you want to do is take these metal brackets off. When you get pads, they will normally come supplied with those, and sometimes they will also be supplied with new bolts as well. This particular kit does come with the sliders, and I think it comes with the bolts as well. So once that's then off, what I tend to do is just put that back in place again, and then it's a case of getting your brake pads prepared. So the next thing you want to do is clean the caliper slider area, so those metal brackets that you took out before. So with a wire brush, all you want to do is just get all of the grime and dirt out of it. You can also use a brake cleaner, which just makes sure that you've got no grease in there, because what can then happen is you get squeaky brakes, or sometimes they get a little bit stuck as well. So just get right in there, and then that allows you to put the brackets on. Now, as you can see in this picture, the brackets are sided, so we want to make sure that the bracket that we're putting on is in the correct way, is the correct way round. So the lug that sticks out the ends wants to face on the outside of the caliper, and all you do is clip those into place And again, sometimes they can be a little bit fiddly. So you can see that's now clipped in. And again, getting the back one in as well. And you want to make sure as well that you're not touching the brake disc with this, otherwise you're going to get a sort of nasty noise as you're driving. And you can see they just sort of spring into place. And now it's lining the brake pad. So the next thing you want to do is line the brake pad, and all you do is just using copper grease, put it on the back of the pad. I've already prepared this one anyway, and the side lugs, so these little bits here. By doing that, it stops the brake pads from squeaking when you're braking. So do both of the pads, and then it's a case of putting them back into the caliper. So the next thing we want to do is now put the pads into the caliper. Now, on this car, the one with the cable goes on to the rear caliper of the caliper. The blank one goes on the front. So just to show you what it should look like, is this will just clip in to these two, and then you just push it so it's flush. You then repeat exactly the same thing with the rear one. Make sure your hands are nice and clean. Again, we don't want any oil or grease on the pads or the disc itself. So now both the pads are in, so all we're going to do is close this caliper up. Now sometimes if this doesn't go straight on, put the old pad back in the front again and lever it like you did before. Sometimes the piston just opens up a little bit again, so it does sometimes require it. Cable goes through the caliper, and then it will clip into the brake clip if you've got one. On this side, I've got the clip at the top, which you probably can't actually see, so I'm just going to attach that one again. It doesn't have to be done straight away. Then the next thing you want to do is put the bolts back on again. So you just mount the bolts onto the back of the carrier, tighten them back up again, making sure that it's nice and straight. Again, the one thing you really do not want to be doing is cross-threading these bolts, because otherwise you've got a much bigger job on your hands. So there, it just didn't seem to line up properly, so I've just repositioned it. Now I can feel it's tightening up. Next thing you do is just tighten them up again. Again, it doesn't have to be massively tight. So as soon as you start feeling that you're having to put some really sort of emphasis onto the resistance of it, that's when you want to be stopping. So that's it. I don't really want to be doing any more than that. Do exactly the same thing with the rear, the bottom one. And then that pad is ready to go. Really important that you make sure that you change both sides of your car at the same time. So if you have a problem with, say, this wheel's brake pads, just change the left hand side as well, because otherwise you can have a bad balance, which means the car could swerve to one side under braking. The other thing is that your brakes, when you first pull away now, will not work effectively. So what you want to do is pump the brakes a few times so you get some resistance on the brake pedal. You'll feel that it's very floppy, and that's basically where there's no fluid basically in this caliper. So you just want to compress it again and then drive on. The next thing you need to remember as well is when you have brand new brake pads or new brake disc, or the combination of the two, your brakes aren't going to be very good for a few hundred miles. So make sure that you're slowing down a lot earlier. Prepare much more in advance, because the emergency stop can take a lot longer than it would do normally. I hope that video has helped, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.